Hi, Blogging Heads viewers. This is a special edition of Woodruff and Strauss. This is our 1 year anniversary. Tomorrow is first day of the Conservative Political Action Conference, where Betsy and I met, and we decided to start doing Blogging Heads together. And a year later, here we are, about to do this
It's really
again.
wonderful to have such an important life event pegged to such a remarkable weekend.
It's the Super Bowl of what was it? It's apparently like this. It's the Super Bowl meets like the Grammys or something. That's how I
Yeah,
saw one
something like
thing.
that for conservative grassroots activists.
Yeah. I mean, like, we're going to talk mostly about CPAC tomorrow and what's going to be important. And I'm a little excited about this, Betsy, because last year it wasn't in the midst of a presidential primary, especially it's one where there's no incumbent Republican.
Right.
So, and like, they're all going to be like 10 of the candidates are going to be there. You know, what are you excited about? What do you think is important to pay attention to? And, you know, like in doing this thing, I realized that like, you've probably been thinking about stories you want to write tomorrow, and it's hard not to betray that.
Right, exactly. You know? I'm not giving off any scoops, first off.
Right.
Okay. My best CPAC insight will be at slate.com. That said, I think CPAC speeches are obviously a very big deal, and it's kind of a high-risk endeavor for candidates, speakers, attendees, because you can sort of have like a Mitch McConnell moment where you awkwardly try to pander to the base and just face plant. You know, McConnell went last year and waved a rifle over his head, and it just looked like extremely odd and unnatural. And his Democratic challenger ran ads where she was using a gun correctly, and it was just like obviously a misstep.
I don't know. I actually kind of thought the Allison Lundergan Grimes ads were actually also kind of silly. I mean, just inviting him to a gun range, being like, McConnell doesn't know how to. I thought the whole thing was goofy.
It was not a great moment in American political discourse. It wasn't necessarily the single most highbrow and intellectually heavy-hitting news cycle that we've had.
Yeah.
But the point is that like people go to CPAC and the temptation is to do the kind of things that appeal to conservative grassroots activists and to harp on those issues. And sometimes attendees sort of lose their way. I was seeing Mitt Romney made his severely conservative comment at CPAC.
Oh.
Beverly Halberg had a good post up about this on, I forget what blog she put it on. We'll put the link below, just kind of chronicling some of the biggest CPAC gaffes. So I think the two things to watch for are which speakers really distinguish themselves. Like last year, I thought Rick Perry won CPAC. He gave a speech first thing in the morning that had people jumping out of their chairs. It was really remarkable. Just a nice boost for him. So it's gonna be interesting to see like who are the surprising people who give speeches that really stand out and generate buzz, to use a phrase that makes me feel like I'm, you know, slowly just decomposing into a little pile of non-human matter. You know, Ben Carson is talking first thing on Thursday, so I don't even know if this episode will be up.
And there's a lot of hype around.
Yeah, CPAC loves Ben Carson. The Ben Carson 2016 people were very active last year. Lots of banners, like signs and T-shirts and stuff. And I think part of the reason that Carson is thinking so hard about running for president is because there's this cadre of supporters that just think he's the guy. He's the only person who can beat Hillary, and that he would definitely win if he ran. And they buy all his books and make them all go bestsellers and go to all these book events and stuff. And it's very interesting. So it's gonna be interesting to see like how the support for Ben Carson looks compared to the other guys.
It's funny you mentioned that. So, like, the weird thing about this primary to me, and I think the important thing also about CPAC, is that it just seems like right now, there's a lot of polling out today in the last few days about how Scott Walker's up in X and Y, and he's up in Iowa. And the important thing to pay attention about, according to this Quinnipiac poll, is that not only is he up, but his unfavorables are crazy low. They're like 7%.
That's interesting.
And yeah, and it's way more split with like Jeb in Iowa. And the thing I've been wondering is like, it just feels like there's a lot more jockeying to be the conservative candidate right now than the establishment candidate. Like, it feels like Jeb has already won that. He's the establishment player. Today in Playbook, Mike Allen devoted 3 paragraphs to saying how Hillary and Jeb are inevitable, which is the most establishment of it's like meta establishment.
It's like the most boring, uninteresting political conventional wisdom that's humanly possible.
But like, people are saying Walker is the guy, and Walker is a really conservative, serious candidate. Then there's Ted, who, as Rebecca Berg recounted on this show, is running around worried, but he's still interested in running. And then there's people like Ben Carson. All those guys excite the base, as I understand it.
Yeah. I put Rand Paul in that category.
And Rand Paul, too. And I just, like, do you think there's going to be, like, some arguing about that? Or, like, there's some confusion there?
As far as who is the base's candidate? Who is the
or the conservative
Bush?
candidate?
Yeah. I mean, definitely. Because and part of the reason for this is that Scott Walker has never really been attacked from the right. He's ran for re-election 3 times in the last 4 years. It's never been in a presidential year, and it's always been him running against a Democrat, charging that he's too conservative. So the basic media vocabulary and the way we talk about Scott Walker, to the extent that he's gotten national political coverage, has always been informed by Democrats pushing the message that Scott Walker is incredibly conservative, and you won't believe how crazy conservative this guy is, too conservative for Wisconsin, blah, blah, blah. So it's always been criticism from the left. But in this presidential primary, he's going to get criticism from the right on a very granular and also very public level. And I think there are some areas where the base will find him, or some sectors of the conservative base will be frustrated. The 2 big things are immigration, where he's said that he opposes amnesty, but then he's also said that it's not amnesty if people pay back taxes and like take English classes before they get a pathway to citizenship, which that's not going to fly.
Right.
Like that is not the definition of amnesty that the conservative base uses. And that's something I think is a big vulnerability for him that we can expect someone like Ted Cruz to hammer him on. So that's the one thing. And the other really big thing is gay marriage. He's kind of equivocated on it. He's made weird comments. It's like he obviously doesn't like talking about it. He's not good at talking about it. At one point, he said he supported ENDA, which is the Employee Non-Discrimination Act that would keep employers from discriminating against LGBT people. So he's, he kind of speaks out of both sides of his mouth, as all politicians do, but he's just not great at it. And that's obviously something that's fixable. This is not a lethal defect. It doesn't mean Jeb's inevitable, but it is something that it's going to be interesting to see how he handles that, if he talks about it.
We've definitely been learning more about Walker lately and how he's a little stubborn, right? So he's, the interesting thing about this primary right now is that the 2 big contenders, Jeb and Walker, are not the greatest speakers. And in the past few days and weeks, Walker has really put his foot in his mouth multiple times with saying, I don't know if Obama's a Christian. I don't know if Obama is loves America. And
that was Giuliani. Walker, I don't think Walker questioned Obama's love for America.
I think he said he wouldn't criticize Walker or Giuliani's comments, but he said, I don't know, but I love America.
Okay. Yeah. Which is good.
Okay.
It's good that he's open and public about his love for America. I'm glad it's a good stance. I'm glad you don't have to ask him that. Yeah.
I think that's an important confusion of what I said, Betsy, though. Because what caught attention in a lot of places, maybe where I'm reading, is that Walker, it wasn't ever Walker. I'm never going to click on something that says X candidate doubles down. But it just seems like Walker's big trouble is not only speaking, but realizing where the media is going to pounce. Yeah. And that, if there's one sentence that's really juicy, they're going to disregard all the context around it.
Exactly.
But you're right. Walker has been, immigration and gay marriage are the 2 questionable things.
Yeah.
And that actually, it's interesting because those are the 2 big weaknesses, I think, of Jeb. Well, no, that's the 3rd weakness after Common Core.
Yeah. Common Core could become an issue for Walker too, because when he was campaigning, he promised that he would get through legislation removing Common Core from Wisconsin, because the decision to take Common Core into Wisconsin was made by, I believe, the education supervisor, which is probably not the correct title, but the education bureaucrat who runs Wisconsin schools. And then some of the Common Core activists I talked to in Iowa said they're worried that Walker is instead going to pass like some sort of compromise legislation that lets school districts opt out of Common Core if they want to, but doesn't require it, that they would see as like toothless and ineffective and, a violation of that promise.
Yeah.
So the thing about, Walker's biggest advantage is also his biggest liability, which is he's a governor right now. So on the one hand, he can say, I'm an executive, I know how to run things, I'm doing a good job, I've actually been in charge of stuff before. But on the other hand, he is governing, and that means that everything that he does or does not do is going to be incredibly scrutinized.
Yeah.
So there's a huge amount of pressure on him, on his staff, on Wisconsin Republicans to balance making good public policy decisions for their state with the fact that every single thing that happens in the Wisconsin State House, there's going to be somebody thinking about how it connects to 2016, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It doesn't mean that they're going to make bad policy, but that's going to be a huge motivating factor for everything.
It's funny how, how much it feels like right now the GOP loves governors, and that's been the word for a while. And yeah, there have been a lot of exciting candidates there, but there are a lot of exciting candidates on the GOP side in the Senate too. And if it was reversed, and if Democrats had some good governors, in 2004, there was, Howard Dean was the front runner early on. But it's funny how much high risk and reward there is to being a presidential candidate who is a governor, because you don't have that gridlock that the Senate suffers from and the Senate candidates suffer from right now. But you said, Walker, in the same way, has to worry about these things. And he's going to, if he's trying to balance the budget by cutting $300 million from the University of Wisconsin educational system, there's going to be a lot of criticism about that. And right now, he's also, there's also there was a little tension, there was a little back and forth, a little visible arm twisting or a little sort of something, mumblings about the state legislature in Wisconsin pushing a right to work bill. And
but that's happening,
yeah. And Walker at first had been like, I don't know, it might be a distraction, and I did a little reporting on it.
Look at you doing some reporting.
Yeah, look at
this
me.
Guy.
There's sort of a history of him having to factor in what the legislature wants or something.
And he also promised when he was first running for governor that he would not pass right to work legislation.
Right.
So the way he's explained that has been by saying that was a promise for his first gubernatorial term, which I haven't parsed the language. I haven't gotten an English professor to do expert analysis.
Right.
But it's definitely a line of attack the Democrats will use. Although it's obviously not going to hurt in a Republican presidential primary at all.
Not really. No.
Not at all.
He'll be good.
So I'm really interested to see how Walker handles CPAC. It's going to be interesting to see what kind of reception he gets.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting. I feel like Ted Cruz is probably the most, in terms of CPAC, probably the most interesting guy there, because these are his people. Ted Cruz has his entire Senate career he's basically the CPAC senator. And
do you remember his speech last year? I mean, it was my first one, but I just remember, I don't know if this was odd. I'm pretty sure this wasn't true for everyone else, but it was packed for Cruz, and everybody stood for Cruz. Not everyone stood for every other candidate. They stood for Cruz.
After he spoke?
I think before he spoke.
Really?
Him coming in. I
missed that.
It's not VVS.
What's VVS?
Values Voters Summit.
Oh, okay.
But I distinctly remember, I think it was at CPAC, the crowd stood as, Cruz took the stage, which
That's
you do
really interesting.
For when a president walks into a room.
Yeah, it's true.
To emphasize your point, Betsy.
So it's going to be interesting to see if that happens, Because I feel like the conservative base and conservative activists are a lot more excited about Walker now than they were about Cruz. I think Cruz might have been the flavor of the week for a couple months. But, that doesn't necessarily have staying power. The way that, Walker's family getting death threats and harassment from protesters does. Walker has a narrative that Cruz sort of has a narrative in that he won the primary against David Dewhurst who is then the lieutenant governor of Texas.
I don't
But
know.
not the same way Walker does.
I think to the, I obviously am not as well sourced as you are on this, Betsy, to use your phrase. But like, I think like to the base, Cruz has a pretty solid narrative. He came to DC, make DC listen, fought Obamacare, fought, against the corrupt establishment Republicans who are there just to, stay in office. I think that's what conservatives, that's why they like him.
Yeah, they like him. It's not that they don't like him.
Yeah.
But I mean, the Walker story, if you're a conservative activist, if you're emotionally invested in Republican politics, the Walker story is, it's the beautiful mind of political narratives.
Yeah.
Right?
No, and you know what? And one thing I want to say is that, I pity Democrats if they really, highlight that he hasn't graduated from college, because you know what? That's exactly what Scott Walker wants.
Yep.
These snobbish East Coast Democrats with Hillary Clinton, all of her fancy schools and stuff, crapping on the ho-hum Midwesterner who's just trying to like cut government fat, who didn't graduate from college.
Yeah.
That is a great thing for Scott Walker. And he loves every second of it. Yep. And, if Democrats decide to do that, good luck, guys.
God bless
not going to go all over.
Right, because all Walker has to say is, we had an Ivy League professor as president for 8 years. Look how that worked out, Like...
Technically, I want to quibble on this. Technically, the University of Chicago is not an Ivy League school.
Oh, okay.
But, you get your point. That's how you soundbite it, okay?
Fair point.
Right? No one's going to call it out.
Correction. A University of Chicago professor anyway, I digress. Yeah, no, totally. And the other thing is that all these protesters, the protests when Act 11 was getting passed, and now there's protesting with the right to work legislation that's going through. That is awesome for Scott Walker. Every time a college student poops on a police car in Madison, Scott Walker wins like another 10 Republican primary voters. Direct correlation. Scott Walker is the guy who's standing up not only to the unions, but also to the Occupy-style protesters, which is factually accurate, which is what he's doing. So anytime people show up, anytime people wave crazy signs, anytime they wear nutty outfits, it's awesome for Walker.
Yeah. So if in your opinion, if you're Walker or if you're Ted, I guess I'm interested in those two guys the most. What is a win by going to this conference in 2015 for you? Do you want to make sure you do better than, if you're Ted, do you want to do better than Scott? If you're Walker, do you want to make sure that you're still just in the game? Because you're right, these are Ted's people. These are his folks.
Right. I think a win, well, obviously the Strauss is the most important single thing.
And Ted won that last year.
Right.
Surprise.
Yeah. If Cruz does not win this year, I think that's going to be significant. Yeah. I think if Jeb doesn't totally bottom out, that would be significant. Mm-hmm. If Walker wins, that obviously would be quite significant. And obviously, I think other candidates who can see the ability to gain from the straw poll, obviously Ben Carson, if he has a decent showing, Carly Fiorina, she's on the board of the organization that runs CPAC. She's going to be very visible through the event, very involved. So it's a big chance for her to kind of, try to be like, hey guys, I count, I'm a person, I'm running, remember me. I guess it's a very important platform for her.
Right.
A win, yeah. I mean, a win is, giving the speech that generates the most excitement.
Right.
And then doing well in the straw poll, I think. And I don't know that I have any hot takes.
Yeah, I don't have any hot takes about that. But this is a good segue to something I did want to talk about on CPAC. What do you think of coverage of CPAC? Because I've heard some grumbling from people, but I mean, the most legitimate argument I've heard on CPAC is that, listen, CPAC is great, conservatives go, Republicans go, but some big players, some big people either go who give a speech, they just go and give a speech and then they leave. They kiss the ring and then they go. And then, the big operatives or activists aren't there. They're out. They don't have time to spend 3 days walking around in booths and schmoozing. Anyway, schmoozing. Thank you. I feel like coverage uniformly is always consistently, this is the entire Republican Party, this 3-day thing, which is kind of what CPAC aims to be. But I think, that's a little unfair, or a little
It's totally unfair.
Yeah.
Because the CPAC candidates don't typically win the nomination. Like,
Right.
the GOP has not nominated a CPAC darling in forever.
Mhm.
And also because the reality is that, like, Republican Party leadership is much more centrist than, your average person picked at random from CPAC. And what annoys me about CPAC coverage is how a lot of it is kind of hee-haw, conservatives are dumb. It's just like, those stories can be great, they can be fine, but a lot of it's just, like, very boring.
I just feel like reporters are all running for the story.
Everyone's looking for the biggest weirdo.
Uh-huh.
Everyone wants to interview the guy with the Gadsden flag wearing Revolutionary War garb.
I've gotten a picture with him.
He's really a celeb.
Yeah,
He's a big deal.
he is.
Yeah, everyone, it's always kind of like, oh man, who am I going to find who's going to say the craziest thing? I'm going to follow that guy around. It's okay. It's kind of boring. I don't think it gives people a better sense of why things are happening in American politics the way they are. Sometimes it's good. I find it irritating. Everyone writes a story about the CPAC parties. I went to a bunch of CPAC parties. There were drunk college Republicans. It was crazy parties. And that's fine. And sometimes those stories can be fine.
I gotta be honest, I kind of look fondly on the college Republicans who go to this thing because I like, they spend like months planning for this, and they're like,
they have an awesome time.
Yeah, they get their best bow ties out, and it's kind of fun. I like that. I totally support that. But anyway, you were saying, so those are the
it's just like feels very tired, like not very interesting.
Yeah.
Now, one kind of, I think the most memorable story from last year's CPAC though was Alexandra Petrie at Washington Post wrote up a CPAC panel that was talking about race relations and how to persuade to people that you're not a racist if they call you a racist. And the panel was basically as much of a train wreck as you would have expected. There ended up being like this guy from the Towson College White Students Union who talked about separate but equal stuff and how like white Southern Christian men are under attack. And someone got video of it, obviously. And the story is it's just like, it's a good CPAC story, and it's totally fair.
I bet, yeah. My predecessor at TPM, Benji Sarlin, are you sure that was last year or the year before? Because Benji did something on something like that.
It was last year. It might have been 2013.
Yeah, okay. I might have been, because I
get them mixed up.
My predecessor...
there's so many beautiful CPAC memories that mingle together in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess those are the, sometimes those stories do well. I mean, but you're right. I think, personally, I'm with you. The best CPAC coverage is going to be different. It's not going to be, look how crazy this guy is or how weird. And, there's some of that there, but like, I'm with you too that there is value in this thing. It's just like, I don't know. The other thing about it is that I just feel like it's really hard to like accurately get the pulse of the conservative movement by running around at this convention for 3 days. That's just not enough time.
Yes, agreed.
In the same way that I think, it's, well, maybe progressives are pretty much easier. We hate Rahm Emanuel. We love Elizabeth Warren. There, done. That's a progressive.
What about Hillary? That's complicated.
Yeah, it's complicated with Hillary. Right? There's too much grumbling. I don't know.
Interesting.
Yeah. You got me thinking, like, what about Hillary? There have been stories written about this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Area progressive, uncomfortable with Hillary Clinton's Iraq war vote.
Oh my god.
Developing story.
Oh my god.
But it's interesting and it's fair, Like,
yeah.
I feel like we're seeing more and more. We're seeing progressives use tactics that we tend to assume Tea Partiers use to exert more influence on the Democratic Party.
Absolutely.
Which I think that's a really important and interesting, like, big picture political story.
Just today, and I want to get back to Rahm later, but the move on the groups that love Warren, the Run Warren One groups, moveon.org is, and I think the PCCC is really happy.
Which PCCC is Progressive Congressional Campaign Committee. Or
Progressive Change Campaign, something like that. These are these liberal outside groups that seek to move the debate and support liberal candidates, and they love Elizabeth Warren. Mm-hmm. They're pretty happy that establishment Democrat Rahm Emanuel, the the cutter of schools and funding for mental health clinics.
Enemy of children.
Was
scourge of the mentally ill.
He's evil, apparently. And he's 9 fingers and was a ballerina.
He was a ballerina?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I did know about the finger thing. I mean, technically like 9.5 fingers, but...
Yeah. I mean, that's part of this,
It's interesting. I don't know.
They're really happy that Rahm was forced into a runoff with this guy, Chuy Garcia, because, they want these establishment Democrats, and they're, frankly, Betsy, to me, they're worse than these groups are worse than their counterparts on the right, like Senate Conservatives Fund. They are less aware of the progressive field out there. I think one of the most telling...
What do you mean by worse? Do you mean they're not as effective?
They are not as effective.
Without a doubt. Yeah.
Yeah. They cannot make candidate, like the reason Mitch McConnell's team reviled, hated the Senate Conservatives Fund is because the Senate Conservatives Fund can get conservatives to start screaming in 2014.
Right. They recruit candidates.
Right.
They plan ahead. They can raise money.
Right.
They can be fairly savvy. Not always savvy, but, who am I, guess? They're an effective organization.
Well, they are savvy in, like, figuring out candidates they want to support and being aggressive about that and, like, being like, we're going to be happy if we get X, Y, and Z there. And really, even a nod from those groups being like, yeah, we're looking at this guy is great for those possible candidates because they're like, oh, I'll have support from these guys. I could actually do it, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like we don't see that on the left.
No.
And I think Rahm having a runoff is maybe the example, like the first big example of that actually happening. And you have like Zephyr Teachout in New York.
Yeah.
Who got a decent amount of buzz and support.
The problem is, though, is that, like, these groups didn't pick Zephyr and they didn't pick Chuy.
So they aren't recruiting people.
Yeah, they aren't recruiting. They aren't endowing them early. They're coming back and trying to get on the bandwagon. And, like, all these groups do that, but more visibly than Club for Growth, Senate Conservatives Fund, Americans for Prosperity, and those guys. They set the debate. These groups on the left really don't.
Interesting. I think that's true.
So.
And I think also these groups have more influence on Congress than their left counterparts have.
Yeah, they
without
key vote, legislation. Say this is how we're going to grade you on this as most conservative because of that. Democrats don't do that, or the liberal groups don't do that. Anyway, CPAC. Back to that, so you don't have to worry about that. The other thing, the one thing I always wish we saw more of at CPAC, I guess, the thing that's incomplete to me about it is that there is less. I mean, it just doesn't feel. It feels like there's. It feels like there's so much. Like there could be. This is the Republican convention, but it doesn't foster enough of like. Hey, establishment Republicans come too. And yeah, we're going to see Jeb. We're going to see Chris Christie this year. They're going to give speeches. But you're right. This is the conservative conference. It's not the Republican conference. And I'd like to see that.
It's not partisan.
Yeah. What's interesting this year is that, Jeb and Christie are going to be there.
Yeah.
And I think Jeb and Christie, I think Jeb is not giving a speech. He's taking questions and answers.
He's doing a Q&A with audience.
So what do you think of that?
Which is pretty ballsy,
Yeah. Well, from what we've seen about...
That's going to be fun. Every single reporter is going to be in the room for that. Everyone is going to write it up.
I don't we're going to be allowed to ask questions.
I don't think so. But yeah, everyone is going to cover that. Everyone is going to write it up. That's going to be the most buzzed about thing the day it happens.
Good on Jeb for this,
it's very risky.
We've highlighted that, Jeb has some trouble speaking, but you can see him, he's such an easier time, in the question and answer, not having to do a teleprompter or recite a speech. He's so much better just sort of laid back and calm and just talking to someone, even if it's in front of a huge group of people. Yeah. I think this is his strength, and they know that, and they figured that out.
Interesting. It's a good strength.
Yeah, I think so, especially right now for Jeb, because Jeb doesn't need to be giving good speeches right now. He needs to be doing exactly what he's doing, which is hiring operatives that everybody in the DC corridor think are really good.
Yeah.
And nobody else cares about, but will pay off later. And then raking in money. And that's what he's doing right now.
And not saying stupid things.
Yeah. Just sitting there. Yeah. That is exactly, and if,
it's almost like this guy knows about campaigns. It's
almost like
he has people telling him about the presidential bid who have good insight and
it's like he's talked to some former presidents.
And
What would you like to see? What is lacking at CPAC besides sort of the emphasis on the silly?
One thing that I found a little bit annoying about the CPAC schedule this year is that a lot of it is just very dry. Like, there's not a lot of panels I looked at where I feel like I have to go to that panel. That's going to be interesting. It's like they have a panel on the electrical grid.
Yeah, that was. It's
just like, come on. What sponsor is pulling strings for this to happen? It's just not interesting. And, maybe it's going to be interesting and valuable, and there will be conservative activists who care about it. But purely from a journalistic mercenary perspective of wanting newsy things to happen, I don't think the electrical grid panel is going to make news. Right. A lot of sort of panels on like deficit spending, which if that's your thing, God bless, it's cool.
Yeah.
But there's only one panel on abortion. There's not a single panel on gay marriage. There's like a panel on can we save marriage, but I don't think it's going to be about gay marriage issues. Yeah. I would have loved to see more on that. I would have loved to see also, I think, more on they have a panel on Common Core, which will be interesting. I wish there had been something that was kind of on perhaps a different look at immigration. The immigration panels they have are kind of, it's not the arm waivers who are doing them. Yeah. I like arm waivers. As a reporter, I have a strong bias.
I love arm waivers too. There were some campaign reporters talking about this on Twitter. I love primaries. I love Democratic primaries. I love contested Republican primaries. That is my goal.
Primaries are great.
I want to see a lot of that.
Tons. Yeah, totally.
So it sounds like you want more of the GOP approaching the big issues that they're grappling with right now.
Yeah.
I feel like the fear with that is that some ugly outspoken heads will rear and the press will cover only that.
Not that would ever happen.
Not that, no.
The press focus on a random person saying something.
The press focus on the most outrageous, sensational things? Who
I don't know what press you're talking about. Yeah. Good point.
Actually, I think this is a good segue to highlight some recent reporting you did on what you could be doing instead of going to the actual CPAC conference, the National Press.
Yeah.
Would you like to talk about this, Betsy?
I would love to talk about this. This
Please
is a great segue.
By the way, I was telling my editor about. Anyway, go
on. I'm just pulling up the story so I can look at it and make sure I get all the names right. There is a event happening at the National Press Club that is going to feature a number of prominent white supremacists / white nationalists. I am not an expert in the different shades of belief among white supremacists.
Me neither.
Much to my chagrin, it's not my area of expertise.
I won't be.
But this is just kind of interesting. This is the National Press Club. It's a storied institution. They have a hard and fast policy that if it's a group that wants to rent a room out, the group can rent out the room. They don't turn people away. If you want to have a thing there, you can have a thing there. Which I think is good. I get that, and it makes sense to me. But as a result of that policy, there's going to be an event called Beyond Conservatism, and it's going to be hosted by the National Policy Institute, whose benign name belies the fact that the National Policy Institute is really big into white people and not so big on people who aren't white. A lot of these...
They are very into European heritage.
Yeah.
Which is the code right now, as I understand it, for only white people.
Right. Yes. They're one of these groups that they oppose immigration because they genuinely think that Hispanic people moving to the United States is bad for the gene pool. That's why. Nobody defends them. Nobody likes them. No one's going to meet with them. They are not influential outside of these white supremacist circles. But yeah, they'll be having an event. And attendees, at least at the publication time, include Peter Brimelow, Richard Spencer, and Jared Taylor, who are all kind of prominent in their own rights among the white supremacist community. So that's just kind of, just kind of a fun, interesting thing that's happening. I don't plan on going and covering it.
I was telling my editor I couldn't get into that one. So,
Rats. What a bummer. So disappointing. But the one Prudential Newsy item that could come out of that is if some reporter went and it turned out, I don't know, there's like a prominent aide to a member of Congress or a prominent, employee of a conservative organization or publication.
What about a Louisiana state senator who would later,
or if Steve Scalise gives a speech
or Steve Scalise. There it is. That was my joke.
Sorry.
That's not going to happen. All right. But I mean, these, Betsy, I want to quibble with you here. I think these, one of my favorite things to do at my old job at the Hill newspaper would be to watch Washington Journal or or listen to obscure interviews lawmakers did in local radio stations, because some of the best quotes and some of the most revealing things about these lawmakers you can find there.
Really?
Because no one is looking. The lawmakers are like, I can let my hair down because no one's going to pay attention. And they say crazy things sometimes.
Interesting.
One of my favorite stories that I wrote at the Hill was Loretta Sanchez right after Loretta Sanchez during the Snowden stuff, saying there's a whole bunch more information out there, and she said this is buried in C-SPAN. Mm-hmm. And the reason I bring this up in CPAC is because I think some of these, the names alone don't sell it, but have some optimism. I think maybe some of these will be good. Maybe they'll be better. Sorry, I'm pumped for CPAC. I'm in my launch sequence is in phase 2, right?
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
So, I think these will be good, and I think, I've got optimism here, all right? I've got optimism that this convention, even though they take pains year after year after year to tamp down on the crazy, will still bring good stories. You just have to look, and you have to, not be so obsessed with finding the super crazy, I think.
I think that's a really good attitude.
And this is, anyway.
Well, speaking of good stories, you want to talk about the story of last night about Chicago?
Yes.
Now, are you from Chicago?
I am from Chicago. I'm from Hyde Park, Chicago. I am a biracial person from Hyde Park, Chicago, just like the president. Rahm Emanuel, Obama's former chief of staff, who was heralded as the inevitable candidate when he left the White House after Mayor Daley decided that he wasn't going to run for re-election, was forced into a runoff against Jesus Chuy, spelled C-H-U-Y, Garcia.
What do we know about Chuy Garcia?
He was Cook County Commissioner, state legislature, an alderman, and he was one of a number of candidates running for the seat. He was actually not an early big name. The big sort of firebrand challenger was another guy named Bob Fioretti, who's always been kind of a thorn in Rahm's side and been kind of a fire breather. He didn't win a lot, and there were a few others. Some of the names I can't recite off the top of my head, frankly. The telling thing about this is that the sense is among locally and nationally that Rahm is going to win re-election. All right, that's what all the Sun-Times, Tribune, DNA Info Chicago are all covering from that angle. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, he's forced into a runoff. This is Obama's former chief of staff, Mr. Chicago, and
this is Darth Vader of Democratic politics.
The Darth Vader of Democratic politics. This is and the thing you have to understand about Chicago is this city has incredible penis envy. They want a national figure because they feel that they're constantly overshadowed by New York, which is part of the right. Which is and that's not going to change. Sorry, guys, but I like Chicago better than New York, and I can make the case for that.
Interesting. So
it is bad that Rahm, endorsed by a president who is beloved in this city, lots of money. I think he's raised something like $15 million, was forced into a runoff to someone who had, I want to say 1.5 million or something. Mm-hmm. And he, Garcia was actually not the big challenger that liberals had hoped to attract. That was someone else. And the name is going to kill me. Who dropped out because Karen Lewis, sorry.
Okay.
Karen Lewis.
Oh yeah, the teachers union.
Yeah, the Chicago Teachers Union president who dropped out after a tumor was found in her brain. Right. And Karen Lewis is a big fire breather. She's gotten national attention as Rahm's big foe. She's like vocally been quoted saying like, in a one-on-one with Rahm, I didn't like him. And she was sort of the favorite that these outside groups that we mentioned earlier was going to be popular with. So Rahm is forced into his runoff. He has 6 weeks to go. The thing is, Garcia won major parts of Chicago that are heavy with Hispanics. Rahm won parts that are popular among the wealthy, where the wealthy live, and white voters live. Yeah. And the big knocks on Rahm that are easy
to... PAC, rich people for Rahm Emanuel.
Pretty much, he has a super PAC. His super PAC backs aldermen. Isn't that crazy?
Wow.
They back city council members to help them win re-election. I love Chicago politics. I think it's great. I think this is awesome. Like, I love when all the attention goes onto like a local race. I think that's the greatest thing.
I think it's I'm a big fan.
So the big thing about this, and the thing you have to keep in mind is that the big knocks on Rahm have been twofold. One is that he's closed mental health clinics. And then he closed a lot of schools that weren't doing well. It's only like 30. And he did it all at once. Chicagoans did not like that. They did not like that. He's helped some of the wealthier parts of the city, places like the downtown area. He's gotten a great bike share program going, which I think is actually better than DC's, or is going to be very soon. Yeah, and I love the DC bike share system. Yuppies and people from the upper middle class, like where I'm from, are really dinging it. But it is very, very easy to campaign against Rahm as a hard-nosed, stubborn guy who closes schools
that don't
help the poor and blacks. And the other thing is that Rahm was also mayor during a huge murder spree in the city where there was bad stuff. This all has come together, and Rahm is sort of suffering for this.
Mm-hmm. And on top of that, the police violence.
Yes, and
the Chicago Police Department has just been...
Yeah, well, why don't we highlight this? Spencer Ackerman at The Guardian. I'm sorry, Betsy. I cannot resist. I read this story, and I was like, it came out right before the election. What a coincidence. Spencer Ackerman at The Guardian reported yesterday on the eve of the Chicago mayoral election that the Chicago Police Department has essentially a black site where they go to interrogate suspects. And they interrogated the NATO 3, who were these sort of terrorists who wanted to, do something bad at the NATO summit. But they also bring prisoners and people before booking to this place to interrogate them. Not good. Not good.
Not good.
Not good.
Bad.
And
somebody died at this site.
Yes, somebody died at this site. It's not good. The city has been silent on it. The big thing lacking from this piece, which I thought was an excellent piece, was that, the city won't comment. The Chicago Police Department won't comment. Rahm isn't going to comment on it. I hope the Chicago media asks him about this. I think they will. There are some great reporters there who we'll hopefully have on our show soon, eventually. That is that. What do you think about it? I mean, what is this like watching this unfold? And it's just...
Yeah, it's interesting seeing this happen on the left because this is pretty much standard operating procedure on the right now,
Yeah.
Like if you're an elected Republican, you have to assume there's a 10% chance you're going to get a primary challenger, and a decent chance that you'll get a credible primary challenger, or a much higher chance than 10 years ago. But on the left, it just hasn't been the case at all.
And Democrats are very smug about that. They're very we're more organized. We like it,
Right, yeah. More ideologically homogenous.
Yeah.
Heterogeneous. So it's interesting seeing it happen on the left. It's interesting seeing progressive activists start approaching their leaders and their people the way that conservative activists do.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like this is already a victory for them, full stop. The fact that it's going to a runoff.
Yeah, no, this is a win. But the interesting thing is, I don't know if the liberals are really counting this as a win. I think they want all the way. And I think conservatives sometimes are like, yeah, we made our presence known. Because they know that inches toward bigger wins later.
Right, yeah.
So
it's interesting. It's interesting. I hope it's a precursor of things to come.
I talked today to a friend of mine who's a Rahm fan, okay? And I feel like, and what was interesting to me about this, besides the fact that he's one of my closest friends, is I asked him, why do you want Rahm to win re-election? And he gets all these knocks. And he said two things. He's in healthcare. He's studying to be a doctor right now. One is that, and he's been dating someone who's in the city education system. And the one thing is that the philosophy in education is that you close all these schools that were underperforming, doing badly, and that's kind of good because you can move the kids to the other schools and you get rid of all the bad teachers and you keep the good ones and they go to the other schools.
Yeah.
And then the other argument is that close all these mental health clinics. I'm not going to explain this very well, which also were underperforming, and you use that money to move a lot of these people into private care and through Obamacare into basically better systems for handling these people. It is a really hard argument to make. And it's like, even now, I didn't explain it that well. You can't put that on a bumper sticker. You can't explain that in two sentences. And so Rahm hasn't really tried nationally or done a good job of that. But I think that's why voters are voting for Rahm, And also the view that Rahm has national name and national pull, and we want to be a national city. So you need someone like that who can bring in money. But he hasn't so far. He didn't bring in the Olympics, and he's trying to bring in the Obama Library.
Chicagoans should thank God that Rahm didn't bring in the Olympics.
Really?
They're a scourge. The cities that have Olympics, they never use the Olympic centers for everything. They just sit there and become decrepit, awful eyesores. You have to level an enormous amount of space to get all the Olympic stuff built. It's never lucrative. Like, cities don't make money off of having the Olympics. I don't think it makes cities automatic tourist destinations. Like, oh yeah, Atlanta. All of a sudden, everybody wanted to go to Atlanta. No.
Well, I want to,
When people were talking about having the Olympics in DC, I had significant emotional crisis about it. Yeah, I was like, I can't move, but we're talking about having the Olympics here. Breathing exercises.
Okay, blessing in disguise. I'm just saying, during the last World Cup, I wanted to go to Brazil. I still want to go to Brazil.
The World Cup is totally different.
It is?
It's not the same as the Olympics.
Well, why is that different, though, from a city perspective?
Well, I don't know. I don't know as much about it from a city perspective.
Okay.
I don't know.
I don't know about either of these things, so I'm not contradicting you. I actually don't know.
You know who would know about this is Byron Tao.
We have to have Byron Tao. This is the call. Let's end on this note. Byron Tao, Wall Street Journal reporter.
Notable
polymath of urban design, full of opinions. We would like you on our show. I can't. Can you finish that sentence for me, Betsy?
Or I'm just a little period there. We're good. Anything else we need to talk about?
No.
Is this the agenda?
Yeah, I think that was it. So
it's been a really heartwarming and a delightful anniversary
great
episode.
Year. I hope we make it to another year, Betsy. And in all seriousness, so I really enjoy doing this program with you. And I hope we keep talking and keep agreeing and disagreeing politely.
You got it.
All right. I will see you later.
Bye, guys.
Bye.